Okay, today what we're going to talk about is dodging and burning. This is a technique that actually comes from the old wet dark rooms when we were developing prints. And the idea is that you can lighten up dark areas or darken up light areas. So, for example, on this photo here, you can see that there's a lot of shadows. Let's look at the girl on the left here. You can see that one half of her face is very bright, one half of her face is very dark. You can't see many of her features. Same thing with the gal to the right who's sitting down. And what we can do is actually go in to these photos and use the dodging and burning tool to brighten the dark areas and darken the light areas. So let's actually start with the gal here who's sitting down. I'm going to zoom in. I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut of Control and Spacebar, which will turn my cursor into the zoom tool. And I'm going to kind of marquee it in until I can just get her face here, and that's pretty good. Over here on the toolbar, about a little more than halfway, you'll see something that looks like a lollipop. And actually, this comes from the old dark room where you would cut out a piece of cardboard in the shape of a circle and put a stick on it and wave it in front of the light to make sure that less light showed up on the photosensitive paper. And by doing that, you would lighten up the picture a little bit. So that's the dodge tool. If you click and hold down, you'll see that there's a burn tool. Looks like your hand with a little circle on it, and that is also from the old dark rooms. If you wanted to darken an area, you made your hand into a little circle, and your hand and your arm would block the light from hitting the areas around your hand, but the area that was in the center of your hand where the light was going through would appear darker. And if you click and hold again, you'll see that the third one is a sponge tool. And what the sponge tool does is it'll either add color, vibrance to a photo, or take color away from a photo, kind of dulling it down. And we'll play with that a little bit too. But let's start with the dodge tool. And you can see that the dodge tool is a brush tool. So if you look up at the control panel, you see right now that we have a 65 pixel brush. The hardness is at 0%, so it's very fuzzy. Kind of a big tool right here, but we are going to try to take the area here about halfway through her face and her hair down the side of her face on the right side, the neck area, the back of her hair, her ear, and then the hair on the left side, and just try to brighten it up a little bit. Let's go back to the control panel here, and one thing that we'd like to change right now is the exposure. Right now, if we started playing with the dodge tool with an exposure at 50%, and I'm actually going to do this, you'll see that the change is dramatic. That's a lot of change, and it's not very subtle. It's not really what we want. It's kind of heavy-handed. And you can see that by going in there with a exposure of 50% with the dodge tool, oh yeah, that'll lighten up your dark areas pretty fast, but not so finessed, so to speak. So that is after the dodge tool, before the dodge tool. So you can see pretty clearly what the dodge tool does. You know, here's it lightened, here's it darkened. But since we don't want to be so heavy with that, I'm going to go back to the history palette here and go back one step. And instead of the exposure being at 50%, I'm going to bring it down to 10%. And this way, the changes that I make are much more subtle. And I'm going to start here on the left side here and just click and drag over the areas that I want to take some of the shadow out. Now, I want to try to avoid the areas that are already bright, because that'll just brighten up the bright areas. So across her here, up here at the top. I didn't exactly avoid that little ray of sunshine. I should have. But go through, make sure that I've touched the areas that I want to brighten up a little bit. Try to bring her face out of the photo instead of it getting lost in these shadows. Alright, so I've done that, and you may not have noticed much of a change, but if I go back one step, you'll see that, yes, it has brightened it up quite a bit, and a lot more subtle than when we went in there with the 50% dodge tool. So this is before I applied the dodging, and this is after. Just brightens it up a little bit, brings it a little bit more into the foreground. Let's see. Perhaps her hands would be a good area to do the same thing too. Her hand on the left side here, you know, it's in the sunlight. The other hand kind of gets lost. So I'm going to do her hand, her arm, and maybe a little bit of the arm that's on our left side. So once again, go to the dodging tool. Start here. Try to stay away from the tips of her finger there, because that is bright enough. We don't need to brighten it anymore. Then up her arm here. Try not to touch on the dress too much, because it's really her that we want to bring into the foreground, not necessarily the dress. So here's after dodging. This is before dodging. So you can see how that it brings out her arm quite a lot and brings in the details of her fingers that were lost. Do this with her arm over here, and you can kind of see that even with 10% pressure, that it is really bringing her out of the darkness, so to speak. Alright, so went over that at least once or twice. That's what it was like before I dodged. And this is what it was like after I dodged. So definitely making some improvements here on the photo. Going to go now to the dodge tool in the toolbar, click and hold, and let's switch over to the burn tool. It does the opposite. What it's going to do is darken light area. So I do want to kind of darken this ray of light that comes across her face, that little spot there and that little spot there. And to do that, I'm going to need a smaller brush. And I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut for this. So the bracket keys to the right of the P, I'm going to do the left bracket to bring the brush size down. And yeah, that'll hit that little ray of sunlight there pretty good. Also in there. So that's about the size I want, about a 20 pixel brush. And once again, going to bring that exposure to 10% to make it a more subtle change. So I'm going to click here on this little ray of sun on her hair, and then above her eye here. Go over it a few times. Get it on her cheek. This is an area that definitely could be darkened a little to bring it down to make her face actually a little more equal, so it's not fighting for attention. And then this little ray over here. And I'm going to drag down my history palette here. So this is what it was like before burning, and this is what it was like afterward. So kind of even out her face instead of being it so stark between the shadowed area and the bright areas. Alright, since I said I would show you how to add vibrance, saturation to the photo. I moved down on the picture down to this bright pink part of her purse here, and I'm going to go to the toolbar again to where the burn tool is, click and hold, and change to the sponge tool. Now we didn't actually do this in the wet dark rooms. There was no such thing as the sponge tool, but when you look at the control panel here, you have a choice of desaturate or saturate. And I kind of want this pink to really pop out, so I want to saturate it. Once again, bring the flow to 10%. And I'm going to click and drag over the pink areas on this purse. And I might pick up a little bit of the black of the flap here, and that's a little string there, but I'm not too concerned about that. Since it's such a dark area, it won't make much of a difference. So this is before I added to the saturation. This is before. And go back here. After. Before. After. So you can see that it really makes it pop, really makes it stand out. what do we want to kind of push back? How about the other side of the purse here with these bright greens and such? Just because we can, I'm going to change the mode up here in the control panel to desaturate. Flow still at 10%. And then click over this right side of the purse here and kind of push this color back. And what it's actually doing is taking some of the color information out of the photo and getting it into more of a grayscale. And if you really went in and did like 100% desaturation, it would just turn this part of the photo into grayscale. So let's see the before and after on this. This is before, kind of bright, and then after, push back a little bit. And you can play around with all those different things. And let's do a big dramatic thing here. Before I started messing with the photo, this is what the gal on the right side looked like. And after, you can see she comes out a little more. That pink definitely comes out. The purse actually looks a little better on the right side too. And her face, you see more details than you saw before. Before it was really dark in the dark areas, and the bright areas were just kind of washed out. So that's what dodging, burning, and sponge will do for you in Photoshop.